it's only 4 or 5 verses, and it's quite a challenging passage. I've never actually preached on it before, and it was part of David and I, it's part of our preparation for pre-Advent. It was meant to be the sermon I should have preached last week, but couldn't because I was ill. Because it's about preparation. It says, be prepared because the days are evil and you need to be. I'm going to paraphrase it for you. You live in times that are dangerous to be a Christian. Not dangerous in the sense of physical violence, necessarily, but dangerous because there are temptations out there that can lead us astray. There are priorities that we shouldn't be focusing on. And my challenge to you this morning, and the basic premise of this morning's preach, is Christmas is particularly hard in that respect. Some of the challenges are really obvious. For me, one of the biggest temptations is the Aldi food Christmas catalogue. As I look through it and I go, oh, I want to eat that. I want to eat that. And you all sort of laugh because we know that it's a slight joke, but at the same time, there's an element of truth in that. Gluttony is really easy at Christmas. We can overindulge in food and drink and chocolate. Note that I'm keeping chocolate as a separate category to food, because you can eat a meal and there's always room for chocolate. It's something else. But Christmas is a temptation. But it's also a temptation in much more serious ways. Do you ever notice the sorts of adverts that get more common at Christmas and what they're trying to sell you? Because yes, food is the obvious one. What about relationship advertisements? I've noticed that my social media has suddenly ballooned with things saying, if you don't have the perfect partner, have you tried our dating app to find them? Have you considered this service available? Have you considered this website to go and indulge your fantasies? And obviously, I don't click them. But I've noticed that they appear more. And it's more of a concerted effort to click the little thing that says, I don't want to see this in my Facebook feed. Perhaps those of you who aren't familiar with Facebook or don't use social media, have you noticed that on the bus stops, as you drive from Rugby to Dunchurch, there is Christmas lingerie being advertised? Life-size people printed on billboards, scantily clad, slightly juxtaposed with the miserable weather. So it makes me laugh rather than tempted. But it is definitely the case that we all know sex sells, and at Christmas, sex sells more. What about gambling? This is peak football season. There's lots of exciting games going on. I noticed an Ipswich town. Is it Ipswich? I know the Tractor Boys. I had a friend who was an Ipswich fan, so that's why I know that. But I'm really excited about the Leicester Tigers game this afternoon. And because there's lots of sport going on, there's lots of betting going on. Almost every advert break on TV, betting. Have you considered putting a bet on this? Have you considered putting a bet on that? What about just the general lust for what other people have? What about all of the adverts that are telling you, isn't this the best time to sell your house? Wouldn't you love to buy a new car for Christmas? Wouldn't you love to do this, that, and the other? We might watch telly, listen to the radio, and we might think ignorantly or naively that this is fairly innocent. When Paul says, be on your guard because the days are evil, he wasn't picturing modern advertising, you might think. I put it to you, no, that's exactly what he had in mind. For Paul, evil is almost synonymous with idolatry, and idolatry means putting something else in God's place. And in the desire of this world to sell us more stuff, better sex, more food, bigger houses, potential money, all of these things, if we are even remotely ensnared by those things, that's evil. Now, I know that evil is not a subject that we like to address in church very often. We know it's there, but it's a real risk to us. Let me just go back to the passage very briefly. Be careful how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. So don't be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. The will of the Lord is that you as Christians in this place, Dunchurch Baptist Church, that you live distinctly from the rest of the world. This doesn't mean you should all put on your billboard suits, get your megaphones, and go marching through the town, shouting at the church, at the shops that have their Christmas decorations up. It doesn't mean you should not be decorating your church here, or celebrating, or enjoying spending time with each other, and eating well, and being merry, and celebrating Jesus' birth. But it does mean that you shouldn't be getting caught up in the things that the world's getting caught up in. Your preparation in Advent is not to have a big old party at the end. Your preparation is not to have the most bums on seats for your nativity, because it makes you look good compared to the church that doesn't have quite so many bums on its seats. It's not to make you feel like you have prestige in the community. Now, hear me carefully. It is an enormous blessing that Santa came and gave you some money. And you're going to use that for God's good work. I fully believe that. But having the mayor in your church, having your name on a big sign, it's not what Christmas is about. If you're pursuing those things, you're pursuing the wrong thing. If you're thinking about Christmas and you're deciding what's the best gift I can give to X person to make them like me the most, or what's the minimum I need to give to charity to make it feel like I've given something to charity while I spend all this money on myself, if these are your attitudes, they're wrong. You have become complicit in what the world wants. That's enough of a lecture. Let me give you the good news from this passage. The good news is that you don't have to do it alone. It's not the responsibility of you as a specific individual to stand as a representative of all of this church. The church stands together. So, you're a Baptist church. It means you have a church meeting. Put your hands up if the idea of a church meeting fills you with joy and passion and energy. Yes! Well done. Don't worry. It doesn't me either, most of the time. But for the first Baptists, and for the churches that came out of persecution in the 16th and 17th centuries, yes, that what they did is they saw their church meeting as an expression of their worship, because what they did was gather together and say, it is our responsibility together to decide what God's will is for us, on what we have to do, and that's what they did. So next time you have a church meeting, put some time in it, if you don't already, to say, God, what do you want for us to do? Because so often church meetings in Baptist churches are about ticking off an agenda item for how we need to prepare our heat pumps, or how we need to make sure the parking spaces are clearly marked, who's going to mow the grass at the front. These are the things that dominate church meetings. And maybe at the end, you say, let's have a talk about our response to the situation in Israel, Palestine at the moment. It's the bookend at the end of a meeting rather than we need to gather and discern together. Let's go back to Paul. Don't be foolish, understand what the will of the Lord is. You don't have the excuse of foolishness when there are so many wise people in the room. You don't have the excuse to get away with saying, actually, I'm too busy for church. This is always the most controversial thing. People are quite happy to hear, don't spend so much at Christmas, show some restraint, give to those in need, be generous with charity. What people don't like hearing is, go to church, not the other thing that you really want to go to on a Sunday. Go to the carols instead of sitting at home watching the telly. Don't go out for your work do if it clashes with home group. But that's what Paul would say, I think. Prioritize meeting together. Again, important caveat. If your home group decides to gather together and says, we're going to not meet this week because we want to go and witness to the places that we're called to go, absolutely do that. Don't use one as an excuse for the other. That's the distinction I'm making. So don't use my lack of clarity as an excuse for being lazy. Paul ends by saying the means by which we do this. So if that sounds slightly impossible or high-minded, let me tell you that Paul gives us the remedy. Do not get drunk with wine, that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, making melody to the Lord in your hearts, giving thanks to God the Father at all times and for all things through Christ Jesus. The Spirit is the means by which we can do it. It's interesting, Paul compares the Spirit to being drunk. Because when you're drunk, I'm going to make an assumption here that most of you probably know what it's like to be drunk. I'm not going to judge you for this. But it's the lack of control is the primary symptom. You act impulsively in a way as if you're controlled by part of your brain that you'd much prefer not to be in the driving seat. If you've spent much time around people who are under the influence of alcohol or drugs, they say things that they would never normally say. They go to places they would never normally go. They behave physically in a way that they would never normally behave. It is as if they are under the influence of someone else. People who are habitual drunks, and I'm not going to suggest there are any of you here, will often use as an excuse or reason for the things that they do while they're drunk, oh, I wasn't really myself. Paul says the Spirit is sometimes a bit like that. What it means to live in the Spirit is to surrender some of your control to another force, to another guiding influence. People who live fully and firmly by the Spirit also behave in ways slightly unusually, unlike themselves. Sometimes they do things that you would never normally see them do, say things they wouldn't say, go to places they wouldn't normally go. The comparison doesn't quite work, but the idea is there that if we live by the Spirit, it might outwardly look quite odd, particularly to people we know. I remember a friend of mine, we once went to a charismatic renewal conference or something, and my friend was an incredibly stingy and prudish person. It's very me, I'm not going to tell you what their name is. And I said was. And suddenly they just were being extremely generous with their money, and they cancelled plans that they had with some of our friends. This is when I was a teenager. Cancelled some of the plans with some of our friends to go off and do something at a soup kitchen. And we were astonished at this idea, not because we thought that it was a bad thing to do, but because we thought of all of the people who would do it, it wasn't them. And sometimes this is what it's like in churches. When you hear that people you wouldn't expect in your church to do a particular thing have been faithfully doing it for many years. One of the most tired, overworked and stressed people that I know in Rugby Baptist Church, I won't name them, but if they're watching this, they know who they are, also does street pastors. And so was out till 4 a.m. last night on the street in the freezing cold with people. So the person that I would have most thought would say, actually, I need the rest, is the person making their life the hardest for God on a Saturday and Friday evening. Sometimes the people who have the least money in a church are the people who give the most generously on gift days. Sometimes the people who are the quietest spoken in church and in other activities that go on, they'll go to their workplace and they will just constantly be talking about Jesus. The Spirit enables us to be more like God and less like ourselves, and that looks weird. And that's the message I want to give you this morning. Do you look weird enough? Dun Church, Baptist Church, look around you at all of the strange people in this place. I'm being very serious. Churches are odd. There are people here that if it wasn't for God, you'd have never spoken to the other person. There are people here with whom you have absolutely nothing in common. I say this confidently from the front, knowing that I don't know most of you. There are some of you here with whom I have nothing in common whatsoever. I'm certain of it. I'm certain there are people here who, if you weren't Christians, you'd hate each other. You would wind each other up. But God brings the unlikely together into something beautiful. Churches should be beautiful places where people who otherwise would never have even sat in the same building are able to pray for each other. The most distinctive thing about you is your oddness. And sometimes we take that for granted as church. Let me land this somewhere logical and hopefully with something that you can actually do. Because, I need to have a cough. Here's what you need to do. You need to celebrate that this Advent. You need to give opportunity for people in this church to share something of themselves, to be open about the oddness. The greatest thing you can do to challenge the evil in society is to make sure the opposite of what society has happens in here. That means that the voices in society which are most marginalized should be elevated at Christmas. Ask your children to pray. Ask the people who are, and I've got to be careful what I say and where I look while I say this, so hear me carefully, that people who represent a minority group in some sense, not as a token exercise in saying, look at how diverse we are, but to say, actually, your voice doesn't get heard enough, we'd love to hear it. Find time to prioritize that. Ask people to pray who have never been asked to pray and who you normally wouldn't want to ask to pray because you're nervous about asking them. Offer to pray for those people as well. Make sure that you think about giving generously this Christmas as a church. You've been given a generous gift. What generous gift are you going to give? And to who? A friend of mine who's a minister, he's called Tony. I will name drop him because he's a legend. He's in Milton Keynes in an estate called White House, which is in the north of Milton Keynes. And Tony, one of his vows when he became a minister of this tiny church plant was that they would give away more money than they got in each year. And they've managed to do that. Every year they say they're going to give away X amount of money, and they give away more than the church has been getting in its regular giving, because people generously give. That church has blessed so many places. I don't think that necessarily we should all try and copy what White House Church are doing, but I am challenged by any church that says, look, the primary purpose of a church is to give, not to receive. What can you give to this community, to people in need? Have you thought about it? How can you show joy to your community? How can you celebrate it? I love that you're having a 4-part harmony group of singers. Singing is not something I'm blessed with at all. I'm useless. I'd shatter your windows if I sang. But if you have a talent that can bless this church, have you told anybody? Do you think that your talent has no purpose in church? This is often the case. There will be probably the greater part of this group sat here this morning. You will think, I've got a talent, but I've got no idea how I can use it to serve God. Think about that. If you can play the kazoo, how can you play the kazoo to serve God? If you're an accountant, how can you be an accountant for God? How can you do these things? How can you serve and demonstrate them in church? How can we be thankful for those things? I'm just going to read the passage one more time and end in prayer, because I realize I've gone a little bit all over the place. Be careful how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. Do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, singing and making melody to the Lord in your hearts, giving thanks to God the Father at all times and for everything, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is what church should look like. This passage. This is what you should aspire to emulate this Advent to set you up for the year ahead. Will you be a church that sings spiritual songs to the Lord? A church that makes melody together. I don't think Paul meant explicitly music when he said that. A church that works together in a mission together makes melody. You're going to make melody together, joining with St. Peter's for the Nativity later on. It might be slightly unharmonious at the start as everybody crams into a church in the wet, but there is harmony and melody when churches do things together. What are you going to do? How are you going to celebrate the diversity in this place of age, sex, wisdom, money, skin color, confidence? Diversity doesn't just mean, in the church anyway, the characteristics it means in law. We are diverse of thought, diverse of soul. The only thing that isn't diverse is the Spirit, because one and the same Spirit empowers us all.